this will be the third time we've done a podcast, right?
Yeah. The first
Yeah.
one was the rapid weight loss. The second
Mhm.
was the specificity, and now
Mhm.
this is the third.
Yeah. So I think that puts you in pretty rare company, at least for my podcast. I'm not sure how many people I've had on 3 times. So conversation's always interesting when we get together and chat, though. So that's makes it worthwhile.
Yeah, I mean, I really appreciate that, especially since that the past three, I mean, I don't know where this conversation will take us, but the past kind of like three, at least the past two podcasts were different topics. So it's not
Mhm.
like, oh, I'm back. I mean, 2 years later for an update on my previous research, right? So it's kind of
Sure.
like diversifying the topic, which is something that has always been something I want to do. You just don't want to be like the Johnny Depp of powerlifting, where I basically do weight cutting all the time. I mean, that's great, and that's kind of like what I'm kind of known for, like the Pirates of the Caribbean. Although it did suck towards the end. Hopefully, I don't follow that same trajectory, but I don't want to be like typecasted into like, oh, Kedric can only do this.
Right. Yeah. No, that makes sense. That makes sense. And I mean, coaching is wide ranging, and there's a lot more to it than just that. So, or just any one thing. Like people want to get really into, I don't know, technique. Even like you take something broad like technique, there's still so much more to it. You've got to be a generalist to some degree. You know, that I mean, how else would you know where some of the lines are, like lines to not really be crossed? Like I'm thinking about like even injuries and things of that nature. Like you got to be able to manage at least a little bit. Otherwise, you don't really know at what point you need outside intervention. If the threshold is so small that you don't even know like what's going to get better even just with a few days rest, like that's just no way to operate as a like a coach who has to be at least a little bit multidisciplinary.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at coaching, it's just the thing with powerlifting, right? I mean, I think Sheffield does change the landscape slightly with like the huge payout, but until Sheffield, at least in the IPF drug tested side of stuff, it is a very expensive hobby for most. So if you look at it from the perspective that kind of like has multiple like intersections in someone else's life, right? Like you, the only difference I see that with a hobby is that some like you can pick up for most hobbies, at least I think like that people have, you can pick up from where you left off, and you probably be fine. Like if you like collecting stamps, for all those out there that don't know what stamps are, those are the things that you use put on the envelope to send your mail before people started using email. But yeah, those kind of stuff. If you collect stamps, you can like stop collecting stamps for a month, right? And you come back, start collecting it. If you like fishing, you can stop going fishing, or if there's no fish or whatever, you can come back and start fishing again. But I think when it comes to like powerlifting or any like exercise based sports that you are kind of like competing, even CrossFit, right? You kind of have to keep going and keep going, right? The only thing that with powerlifting is that most of the time I would see that the external motivation and rewards are not as huge, right? And therefore something in life may take a higher precedence compared to your powerlifting hobby, right? And as a coach, I think it's very easy to just be, like powerlifting should be the number one focus in your life. Powerlifting should be the priority, right? Like you should like dedicate everything and all your effort towards powerlifting. But unfortunately, I don't think, at least for most people, that is the case. I know there would be some people that literally pour their heart and soul into powerlifting, and that is completely fine. But for most people, it's not. And like I said, I mean, no matter how many high level like elite lifters we coach, we would still always coach people who just compete for fun. They compete once a year. They don't even think about being like, oh, I'm going to break this record or something like that. And those are the ones that I do think like having a very general perspective on multiple facets, whether it's injury, whether it's nutrition, whether it's training, would be important. Not to mention that those are the kind of lifters that will potentially ask you questions about different aspects, because I do think when you have an elite lifter, most of the times, maybe it's a selection bias, they're quite dialed in already. So like the basic questions, they probably already got it covered just maybe by experience that they have gone through in the past, right? Like they probably know what they should eat for macros, their protein. Whereas general lifters just started powerlifting is trying to figure out if peanut butter is a good source of protein or not. And then your role as a coach, you probably should be able to tell them you probably shouldn't get your main source of protein when the fat content is higher than the protein content, things like this.
Right. Yeah. It's useful to stay connected to people at all different levels. That's been important for me as a coach over the years. And I try to make sure that I pick up a novice lifter at least once a year, even if it's just a short-term thing. And usually, I mean, there's somebody local that I can kind of form a relationship with and coach in that way. But it's easy to lose sight of that if you never interact with people at various levels. It's easy to lose sight of what kinds of things are they thinking about, what kinds of things are important. I mean, it sounds silly maybe a little bit, but I mean, I've been doing this for like 25, 26 years at this point. So it's easy to forget what was going through my head at even year 5, 6. So it's useful to maintain that connection with people at various levels of the sport. Like if you care about developing coaching skill in that way, like if you've got your specialty and you're really happy to just really narrow in on that specialty, I mean, I guess that's fine. But like for me, I want to, like the skill of coaching is important to me. So I want to brush up on it at like a range of different levels.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic. I mean, even up to today, I still get like joy when a novice lifter kind of like, oh, hey, you want to work, message me or emails me saying we want to work together. And obviously, if I have the slot, I would be like at the slot, the availability and the time. I'll be like, oh yeah, cool. It's not like I don't
Right.
kind of like bank on. I just don't like say no and then bank on hopefully that my newfound fame would get me someone else so that I can take someone else of a higher level. I just think that there are valuable lessons to be learned. And sometimes I think even going back to our conversation about specificity, and if the listeners haven't listened to the podcast, I'm going to plug it in. Go back and listen to the episode, right? Like we did say that sometimes the way a novice trains, like we talk about that sort of like the bell-shaped curve and on specificity and how maybe towards the tail end of someone's lifting career. I mean, when I say end, I don't mean like actual end, but the longer your training age is, perhaps you should start training very similar to what you were when you were novice, right? Just like slightly more general, right? And I think that if you're always in that sort of like frame of mind that, okay, cool, I'm just training this elite lifter and it's always up and up and up, right? I lose sight of what it feels like actually trying something new, trying something with this novice lifter. And the thing with a novice lifter, it's also is that it's good to experiment because the risk to reward ratio is quite low, right? Like whatever you do, most likely they'll respond, right? So it's kind of like it allows you to kind of explore uncharted territories, explore new grounds, and perhaps that insight could actually translate to coaching your intermediate or even your advanced lifters, right? So I do think that is something there is something to be said and something to learn even from coaching novice lifters, and not just kind of like focusing on coaching a particular type or a particular group of lifters.
Yeah. Oh, totally. I totally agree. Now, that said, there is a particular allure that comes along with the training of elite athletes. And I mean, I don't know. I'm of the mind that I think that's at least somewhat for good reason. I get really skeptical when I hear people say, oh, so and so's a strong lifter in spite of their training, not because of it. Because I don't know anybody at the highest levels of any sport who are just fine to go along with whatever training program plops into their lap. Pretty much everybody's switched on and like cares about it and is engaged, and that engagement looks different. Like some people really want to get their hands dirty and mess around with the design of it. Other people, it's not so much that, but I mean, they definitely care about it. And I think it gets harder and harder to thread the needle with advanced lifters. Like, I mean, you've got this two-edged sword where on one hand, like by definition, they're going to be higher responders, right? So that opens the window a little bit, but also pretty much by definition, they're going to be at an advanced level and probably pushing the limits of what their body is capable of, which really narrows the window quite a lot. So I don't know. I think there's something to be learned. Now that something, again, referencing a previous conversation about specificity, that something may not apply to lifters at all levels, but it's still an important thing to learn.
Yeah, definitely. I think, like, I do think that and then this is a thought that I have had, right? Like, I mean, we also think we've discussed this. We had this conversation like offline, one of our chats, and I think that kind of like applies towards this thought process. At least applies more pertinently or more like obvious towards like high level lifters. Is that when you hit a PR, right? By definition, everything else is subpar compared to your personal best, right? Because technically everything else is lower. So you're always working at in your head what is lesser than your best, and then until you had that inflection point where you exceed your previous PR, right? And I do think that, and this could be a question for you as well, because I know that when, at least most of the time and from the outset, right, in RTS, you'll kind of have like static RPEs throughout, right? So the question, I mean, for me, I think that once like an elite, like, or high level lifter hits a PR, right? For me, an indication would be, obviously, if there's like a big build up, right, towards that PR attempt, right? So they've been training for X amount of weeks. It signals to me, okay, cool, maybe now it's time for us to dial things back, right? Because the ability for elite lifter to keep pushing, right? Like up and up and up every single time, right? That window is so much smaller, right? And you know that, and I think that if we keep pushing for the sake of pushing, we could potentially heighten the risk of injury, right? But then you kind of like, I'm also in this kind of like dilemma where I'm like, okay, cool. Now that they're gaining momentum, right? When should I cut it off, right? Do I just say, okay, you've hit this PR now, I want to dial things back, right? Obviously, it's quite obvious if it moved quick, like if it's an RP7, right? But it's very unlikely that they will exceed their previous best that they perform at the meet at RP like 9.5 to 10 at an RP7, especially if that happens in a short run, considering other factors that they didn't move up a weight class and whatever they perform on the platform was actually like close to a true max, right? So I do think that while some people, for lifter that's relatively young in terms of training age, once they hit a PR, right, usually it signals to me it's like, okay, cool, we potentially can push a little bit more, and they potentially may hit the PR in the near future again, right? But whereas for elite lifter, it signals the opposite. It's like, cool, now it signals to me when should I dial back, right? So instead of the slightly novice to intermediate lifter, I'll be like, okay, cool, how much can I push more to kind of like carry this momentum going? For the elite lifters, like my mindset is like, when is the right time to dial back? So I look at it from different perspectives. So I'm actually curious to hear what your thoughts are just by the way that you do things. Because I think I saw on your Instagram as well, you said that I don't know whether it's bench or squat, right? Whether you said might be front squat. It's like, okay, cool, I started RP8 for like X amount of reps, and like it was basically static, and I was like up like 25 pounds 3 weeks later, right? So given that the RP is static, the decision-making process has to be a little bit sharper, because it's easy to say, cool, right? If you do RP6, RP7, RP8, and then for the most part, unless something happens, RP8 should be higher than RP6. But when you're doing it in a static RP throughout the entire block, if they hit a PR at RP8, what would RP8 next week look like? And if they still hit a PR,
Right.
do you tell them, let's go on and see where you can push? Or do you say, okay, cool, let's dial things back right now?
So there's really two scenarios that come to mind. I mean, I think there's wisdom in pushing, there's wisdom in dialing back, and it's difficult to know which is the right course of action. Kind of my default is to want to push things, especially if I've got a good understanding of how far we can push things. So in my system, that would be kind of referencing the time to peak concept. I remember back when I was first developing emerging strategies. So remember, it's a port over from Bondarchuk's system for throwing. And I learned the system from Derek Evely. And so I talked to him and kind of built a framework for what I was going to do. And we were kind of getting ready for our first trial run at this. And I wasn't doing it because I was training for the Arnold at the time. I was a few weeks out. But Liz Craven and her training partner, Megan Hinchley, kind of, I pitched the idea to them and they were on board to be guinea pigs for it. So Liz, well, they're both world-class powerlifters. Liz at the time was kind of a perennial podium finisher at the World Championship. But at this time, we're getting ready to start our very first emerging strategy style block, right? She was coming off of kind of a hypertrophy phase, not so specific, not so serious block of training, right? So the expectation is that she comes back from this, lifts her a little bit down, and we run the block. One of the goals of this first block would be to establish her time to peak, and we would start to kind of form a picture of her response, but not necessarily expecting like PRs in that first block, right? We figured kind of post off season, it's going to take us a little while to rebuild. But that's not what happened. In her case, we got, I want to say 4 weeks into the block, and she was performing better every week. And she got to the point where she was squatting, I think it was equivalent to, or was very close to, the world record at the time for her like single at 8 in training. And I remember kind of having the same sort of concern. And I remember talking to Derek about it. I'm like, hey, this is what's going on. I mean, that's, first of all, that's really good. But second of all, like, do you think this is a risk? Like, would it be better to pull the plug on the block, end it early? And he said, well, you could. It is a risk. But also, I mean, things are going good. So you kind of don't want to pull the plug early. Just when you start getting momentum, just when you start breaking new ground, you got to let the athlete be an athlete a little bit too. And there's definitely a line to walk. In Liz's case, I decided to let things go, and she continued on another, I want to say 2 more weeks of incremental gain before we reached her peak condition. Didn't suffer any injuries or any sort of negative effects that were detectable. We went on and had some successful preps after that. But I have had other people in other scenarios. I don't know if they'd want me to name names at this point or not, but who we've kind of pushed that sort of envelope with. They've gotten way, way stronger during the development block. And then on the pivot during the change up, then something would get hurt. So trust me, I really do appreciate the seriousness that risk brings. But at the same time, there's the other side of it too, where you've got to let things run. There's kind of a line to walk here between letting training run hot so that you get that progress, but not letting training run too hot, because that's when things break down.
Yeah. I mean, it always like when we speak about this, I think we speak in like really like specific cases. And I think that one advantage, right, that the way you at RTS do things is that because there's a lot of, like I said, the constants are quite a bit of constants. So I think that the granularity of how you can interpret whatever's happening is easier, right? There's less noise. Whereas if you change things up, there's more noise. I've always wondered about like the time to peak, and this is no way trying to discredit the method. It's more of like thinking and hashing out. So
yeah,
do you think that the window for like time to peak, right, is actually wider or narrower? And the reason why I bring this up is that we know like specificity was king. At least, I mean, to some people, it still is king. But in my head, I'm like, the king is dead. Long live the king. Something else. One of those quotes. And I think that because the idea of specificity is basically looking at certain stimulus resulting in certain response, right? And if that specificity, the concept of specificity is wider than we think it is to stimulate an adequate response for powerlifting, I'm wondering if the time to peak could actually be wider, right? And the way I think about this is that the methodology, right, of or whatever you do during training, I always say that everything works at least once until it doesn't, right? So it's just like you can try everything one point of time, it will work somehow or other until it doesn't. And because the ability to create a response is so wide ranging, I wonder if that wide ranging response would actually translate to a wider time to peak. And the reason why I asked if it's wider or narrower, because then depending on your answer, I'm faced with like, if it's so wide, right, does it really matter? But if it's so narrow, are the tools we are having, can we like say with some form of epistemic certainty that we can actually replicate that narrow range again, right? So it's more like, yeah, if it's so wide, does it matter? And if it's so narrow, can we actually get it right? So I'm curious to hear what
Sure.
thoughts are between that. And obviously, like I said, it may vary from lifter to lifter. I don't expect you to say, oh, it's wide for everyone or it's narrow for everyone.
Can you give me an example of what you mean by like a wide window or a narrow window?
Yeah, so for example, like people always say, oh, in a time to peak, it's like, cool, all right, this person, I mean, it's picking up steam now that where people try to practice their competition lifts on SBD day on the day that they compete, right? So let's just say if they compete, they know in 16 weeks time, their competition lands on a Friday, they will tend to try to put their SBD days on a Friday, right? And that is one thing I would define as quite a narrow time to peak, right? So you peak on like that very, very specific day. Whereas maybe a wider would be like, cool, maybe it happens within this week, right? Like, so whether you do it on Monday or Friday, doesn't really matter. Or even if you do it like 10 days before, you're still like, your peaking lasts like not just a specific day, but more like over a couple of days. And it doesn't matter when you do it.
Yeah.
So I think of it from this perspective, is like, is your time to peak like one of those old handguns where, you know, the bullets are there and you have to load it to the specific point before you can fire. So it's like, it has to be really accurate. A wider one would be just like this current automatic handguns where the magazines you can just like fire at will, right? So you're just storing the bullets and you can fire anytime you want, as long as it is within that window. And once you fire it, it's gone, right? So it's that's kind of like the question.
Right. I get it now. I don't think that you would necessarily need to like put your SBD day on the competition day. That I can see where it would be helpful, just in the repeatability of the pattern, and it does simplify certain decisions that you would have to make. But I don't think it would be necessary for peak condition. One way that we manipulate peak condition, it seems to be linked to exposure, not to time necessarily. So we call it a time to peak, but that's maybe even a misnomer. I'm not sure entirely, but like I may find that it takes me 6 weeks to reach a peak condition, but that's if I'm doing like one training week that's pretty much repeated. If I were to do 2 microcycles in a week, then that it's still 6 exposures. You just cover that as 6 exposures in 3 weeks instead of 6 weeks. Or you can run like a longer microcycle. Think of it like an A week and a B week that alternate, and then you stretch it out to about 12 weeks. I mean, your body's not a math problem either, so it doesn't work quite with that sort of mathematical precision. And time to peak itself is kind of this tricky thing to nail down. Like, obviously, there's not like some organelle inside the muscle fiber that's counting exposures to certain stimulus. That's not a thing. It's kind of this emergent property that we seem to notice. And as time has gone on, I kind of think of it as a psychological property as much as anything else. So there's some coaches in our training lab who have said that they notice that time to peak seems to be stable as long as they're repeating the competition exercises. They can change the SDEs and the SPEs, the accessory work, within a range, and we're not really sure what that range would be, but there's conceivably some range. And as long as you kind of stay within that range, you can change things up. But the competition exposure is regular, and so time to peak seems to be more or less preserved. That's wild to me. That something is, it is definitely this observed phenomenon, but I think we're like miles away from like really understanding it to that level of detail. Like we've got like this like coloring book level understanding of it right now. It's enough that we can use it to produce reliable, good performances and understand what's effective about a lifter's training. But I don't think like we've got it all figured out.
Yeah, I think that's like really interesting because like we mentioned in the past, I mean, I don't want to assume people know, but I do like rapid weight cutting strategies for powerlifting. And whenever I do my presentations, right, because the research is so scarce right now, right? It's just there isn't many research done. And then I always say that while these are certain ranges, if you use X intervention will result in X amount of weight loss, I always add the caveat that says that humans unfortunately are not machines. We are like biological systems, right? And there's so much chaos happening in biology, right? Where we cannot like, at least for now, even though I've been like in the trenches of doing this, I can't say for certainty that if you do this, it will result in X amount of weight loss every single time. So I kind of look at that as something that's not as chaotic as training, right? So, and even then, I still cannot adequately say with 100% certainty that this is what's going to happen. So if I carry that concept of like humans just being biological systems and that there's chaos happening in our body, I think that I don't know whether, like you said, you have that psychological time to peak. I'm not sure whether we're trying to kind of use time to peak as a concept that kind of like governs the training response, or whether time to peak actually is a result of the training response after a while, right? For example, because like I said, it has this psychological thing. And
Yeah.
I think that like I said, we are not machines, and it would be great if we were, right? You just input X, you get Y all the time, right? Unless there's some form of virus and or whatever. But unfortunately, we are not. And I guess that's why we kind of like still have a job, right? Because if humans are like that easily, we are that predictable in terms of our training response, or even just how we respond to things in general. I mean, some people would say we are, but if when applying that to powerlifting, you literally can just do ask ChatGPT to write your program, and everybody should probably respond the same. If the program from ChatGPT is given to that person is the same as all the other people, right? Then we
Right.
will be out of jobs pretty soon. But I guess that's kind of like, I guess the role of a coach is kind of like putting on certain lenses, I think, and every lifter you put on certain lenses. It's like when, I mean, I don't know whether people like who don't wear like glasses would understand, but when you go to the optometrist, they sit down there and then they just slot in like different lenses to see which one's clearer. And I feel like sometimes training is like that, right? You put on this lens, and then for this lifter, you check on this and you check on the other one, and then you see which one is a little bit more fine tuned. And it's never going to be 2020, right? I mean, the closest you want to try to get as close as possible, but once in a while, and after an extended period of time, what the lens that you put on right now might not even create that clarity that you had like a year ago, and then you have to switch them out again. And I think that
Yeah.
based on our conversation, the role of a coach is to like saying when to switch out the lens and when do we kind of like still leave the lens on.
That's such a great example, actually. Like I was just thinking about this while training today, like in like with regard to load management. Over the last several years, I've really gone down the rabbit hole a lot on load management and try to try to imagine like what would like load management training strategies look like if you took it as seriously as you possibly could, and like trying to leverage kind of all the tools that I have to doing as good a job with load management as I can imagine. And I've taken it quite far. And it I was just thinking about this today, that I never really realized how good load management could get until I started down this rabbit hole. Like it was a thing where I felt like I had it under control until I started going deeper with it. And then like, oh, I thought I had it under control, but this is actually way better. And then you take it a bit further. Oh, even better. Like applying more detail to this is making the solutions more robust. It's yielding better results. It's yielding better results in terms of progress, but better results in terms of reducing the number of injuries. I mean, should be careful saying that because it's a difficult thing to track and nail down, but it certainly seems like that from a coaching perspective. I don't find myself giving out like our injury documents as much. I don't find myself referring out to rehab therapists as much. It certainly still happens on occasion, but it's reduced. And like even in my own training, I feel more robust now than I have in a long time, as long as I can avoid certain errors. And now that I'm aware of what the errors are, they're easier to avoid. But I really like the analogy of the eyeglass lenses, because I think it captures a lot. First of all, there's that relationship of you think you see the world clearly, and then you put this lens in front of your eyes and you're like, oh crap, things have actually been really blurry and I just never noticed. You never noticed how blurry things were until you get a little clarity. And then that clarity becomes kind of the normal, but there's this adaptive relationship. Now you're spending time looking through this lens and your eyes change and adapt, and that changes over time. So you need a different lens. That's exactly what we see in training as well. That even you take a concept that's supposed to be fairly robust, like time to peak, I do see it change. It changes slowly and it's robust enough that we can rely on it, at least in the short term. But there's nothing I've found yet that we should just like take for like fully for granted. We shouldn't like go back and retest it every couple years or something, at least. Like it changes considerably.
Yeah, for sure. I guess I can say that I'm glad we see things eye to eye. So,
Yeah. I like puns.
yeah. But yeah, I think that the more, I think your case is super interesting because I don't know whether you ever had a coach, because you always have done your own training, and that to me is interesting because you compete at a high level. I mean, you came, I mean, you didn't hit Carpino 1 at PA Nets, but Carpino 1 is like really, I mean, it is a high bar to reach. You came in,
Yeah.
you came in second. This is your written your platform, but you've been doing this for ages, right? Like, I mean, if you think about stuff, is that how long has Mike been in his own head while he's in the gym? It's really, really like crazy to me because even, I mean, I've been doing this for like maybe half the time you've been doing, but I feel like every time I just write my own training, I just feels like I'm working 24/7 because powerlifting coaching is my job. And then if I'm in the gym, I'm technically I'm doing my job while I'm lifting, and I don't want that. But you've been quite literally in your own head for like, I don't know how long, plus you never had a coach, at least in recent years, and you're still training and you have all these like thoughts there. And I would assume that you're not someone who'd be, okay, cool, I'll just like switch off all my thoughts flowing and I just like lift. But especially based on what you're saying, you get this load management, you kind of like fine tune stuff. And sometimes I think that I wouldn't want to assume, but you would probably say that sometimes you even overanalyze things because you're just there at the moment, right? So I think your specific to your case is just like, it's just intriguing to me, and this
There
completely
is
just
sort of
unrelated to what we're talking, but it's just fascinating.
there is an occasional like a misappropriation of resources. Like John can tell you, a couple years ago, I got a flywheel device. I specifically got it so that I would have a way to train when we were moving and traveling. It was supposed to be portable and so on. And I spent a huge amount of time trying to conceptualize like what the stress of, like, say you take a set of flywheel push-ups to failure, like how does that relate to, in similarity and difference, to a set of bench press to failure with varied loads and things like that. Like how do you like try to conceptualize that training effect? And that's, on one hand, it's important and relevant to me personally, and it's an interesting problem, but it's also not at all helpful for most people. Like it's not relevant. So occasionally you do find yourself in those sorts of rabbit holes, but fortunately not too often, I think. And over that amount of time thinking about different problems, it's okay to be off topic now and then, I guess. But I mean, I did go through like a very extended period of like program hopping. It was like several years of kind of latching on to different ideas and changing the program rapidly, and eventually adopting a system that kind of allowed for that. But then eventually, as years went by, I did settle into like more developed beliefs about training, I think. And like I would have more like well-formed thoughts that weren't quite so subject to whatever whim, new exercise or new training schedule and things like that would just kind of blow in from whatever source, that, oh, this changes everything. Like that stuff becomes less and less common. And you start to think more deeply and you have more like a better understanding of what underlying principles are at work. So there kind of gets to be more and more stability up till now, where I tend to change things, but they change mostly. It's not that it's just based on my own thoughts, but like I'm definitely still influenced by what I see going on in powerlifting, but it's a lot slower. The pace of change has slowed down a lot, and I think that's probably for the better. But anyway, I kind of digressed there for quite a bit, but I wanted to hear a bit more from you. You mentioned Sheffield earlier in the conversation, and I kind of thought it'd be interesting to hear from you, like from a coach's perspective, what it was like. What was it like to go? What was it like to be there? What was it like to coach?
Yeah, I mean, where should I start? I think that the first thing, obviously, is to give props to SPD and obviously Pete Spence, who is like the guy spearheading this entire event. I think it's fantastic. It does. I bring this up, like, I think a good summary, right, is that we look at powerlifting from a perspective of the lifter and the observer, right? So I think Sheffield, right, gave the lifter a sense of what it's like to be able to make powerlifting sort of like a career, right? So I think that is pretty crazy, right? It put the lifter at the highest level, give them a potential monetary reward that is pretty substantial, right? So I think from the lifters aspect, you definitely, I mean, you also flew the lifters in, the food and all provided by the hotel, right? So you definitely like took care of the lifter as much as you can, right? And from the observer's perspective, then I think that this is definitely the biggest powerlifting event, at least in drug-free powerlifting, where you basically had almost 2,000 people filling up the hall. And this is not just 2,000 people coming because it's free. People had to pay to attend it, right? So it shows the willingness for people to pay to, and that kind of like, sort of like, it kind of is a measure of how much people value being a spectator of the sport, right? At least at this level. So I think from the perspective of the observer or the viewers, right, Sheffield definitely nailed it. And I think the crazy thing was like the synergy, right, between the lifter and the lifters and obviously the spectators is at the end they had this like meet and greet, right? The meet ran slightly late because which powerlifting meet finishes on time. The meet ran slightly late, and the meet and greet was like at 10-ish, and the lifters were still there. The people who were like meet and greet, people flew in from all different places. They drove down, whatever, but they still showed up to the meet and greet. The lifters could easily say like, screw this. Maybe I didn't perform to my expectation. I'm tired. I just want to bounce, right? I don't know whether they have a contractual obligation to be there, but even if they did, they all showed up. They all like smiled. They all spoke to the people that came to observe them live, right? And the people who traveled in, they stayed, right? And they were just like talking, and basically we were just there to the point where the organizers, sorry, the venue host, right? They had to kick us out because we were overstaying, and they had to close up, right? So it just shows the willingness of both parties as well. And I think that from their perspective, an overarching summary of how Sheffield went for everyone, I think that's a really good summary where you cater towards the lifter, you cater towards the viewers, and then you brought them together, which is essentially powerlifting started as like a community sort of like sport, right? Even with like Westside Barbell, like the Westside boys would just train and they all come at the same time. We heard stories of like if you watch the Westside documentary, like like, I don't know, Chuck Wogapo tying his friend's hand to the rack or something like that. Those are crazy stuff
Right.
that only can happen in like a
Right.
community,
Yeah.
right? And I think that Sheffield really did that. And I think that's crazy. And I think personally for myself right now, going into a slightly more personal aspect, I was there because I coach Emil Kruster, and I think it was just a great privilege and honor to be there for this event. So I do Emil's training, right? And I think the deal with SBD is that those who qualified or are invited to Sheffield, they get to fly their coach in, right? So I do Emil's training. So basically SBD flew me in for the event, right? But I think that besides that, I also had the privilege and opportunity to do nutrition for like Taylor Atwood, Gavin Aiden, and Evie Corrigan. So those three other lifters were kind of like, okay, cool. Now I'm here, right? Because obviously I'm here because Emil flew me in. I can help you with your nutrition on midday rehydration. And it's interesting because I kind of like take out the guesswork, right? Because I spoke to Taylor and Taylor said we've been working for 4 years together. This is our 4th year, but every time you're here, it helps me and it makes me feel slightly better. And I think that speaks a lot because for Taylor, he's also not someone that needs handhold.
Right.
He has performed at the highest level, played like professional football to a certain extent. He's quite self-sufficient, but even for him, he said that it helps when you're here. So
Yeah.
I do think that event was a glimpse of like what professional powerlifting would be like, and it is pretty crazy to me that I had an opportunity. And yeah, I guess that's kind of like the brief summary of my experience of Sheffield. Obviously, I haven't gone into much of how the details play out, which we can probably touch upon. But yeah, that's kind of like the primer towards
Yeah.
how Sheffield went for me.
That's, I mean, everybody who's been every kind of accounting of things that I've heard is just all positives. And yeah, it's good to hear that from a coach's perspective too. I mean, I've heard from quite a few athletes, but only a handful of coaches, so it's good to hear that as well. And I'm particularly interested in talking with you, maybe kind of depending on like what you're comfortable with getting into, talking about Emil Krastev and kind of what, like how things went from your perspective, and then really kind of a lead up to it. If you wanted to think of it almost as kind of like a case discussion about Emil and his training. Hopefully not. Hopefully it's not too awkward to kind of think about that and talk about that without him like being here to kind of give his accounting of things. But you having worked closely with him, I'm sure that you have very similar perspectives, but you're obviously going to see things through the eyes of a coach.
Yeah, for sure. I think that we definitely can talk about that because I do think so. Like I said, all the high level lifters that I coach, right? Like they tend to come for me for weight cutting nutrition advice, right? So Emil was like one of the first. They'll be like, and at first when I like Emil like first signed up, right? I was like, why me? Like I said, if you come for nutrition, I understand, right? I mean, and not to be full of my tooting my own horn, but that's kind of like the trend. But I've never really had someone at that level. And the thing is that you were close to becoming world champion as an 92, right? That you were third best lifter at Worlds in South Africa. So I'm like, you can handpick any coach you want, right? And they will say yes, most likely, right? So for me, it's like, why me, right? Why do you pick me? I definitely had that thought at the start, right? Also because like I don't have the biggest like social media following, right? It makes sense if like he picked like what somebody that has like a lot of social media following or and stuff like that. But that was kind of like the start of it. And when we started working together, right, we weren't aware of the Sheffield invite. So we started working together with the assumption that our first meet would be at Malta. And then we got a Sheffield invite. I'm like, cool, the first meet that I've never worked with you ever in my life, but the first meet is the biggest meet in drug-free powerlifting. No pressure. So that plot came in as well. So it's all really interesting. And I definitely had a little bit of like pressure on myself because I always feel that as a coach, whether you're a high level lifter or whether you are someone who's new to the sport, I always want to kind of like deliver, right? I want you to help you reach your goals. And the reason, I mean, Emil would be able to vouch for this as well, is that he came to me was because he had like, so Emil's like training history was cool, like Worlds, right? That is when the limelight kind of like was like shine on Emil after he, like I said, he almost won, right? And people were talking about it. And then the next competition, Euros, he bombed out, right? The squat depth. And during that time, right, he said that for the past like 6 months or so, 90% of his training sessions were in pain. There are days where he would walk into the gym and he would be like only lifting 70 kilos, right? And he would just go in, do that, and he would leave, right? And that is like quite disheartening towards him. So I knew he came in with a particular set of like prior injuries. So that's something that we had to like work around with, and obviously in the long run address. And I mean, now with all the commentaries that are out, right, people know that he was hurt, right? And obviously what he performed at Sheffield wasn't close to his best in terms of absolute weight lifted. Okay. And I asked him this, right? So I asked him this, I said that given the choice, would you rather be in pain but try to push and get like 5 to 10 kilos more of your personal best, but most of you have to like push through the pain most of the training sessions? Or B, you take like 20, 30 kilos off your personal best, right? But we spend some time trying to desensitize you to pain and try to minimize the amount of incidences or training sessions that you actually are in pain. Which one will you pick, right? And I was not imposing what I think should be the case, because I've spoken to lifters and they will pick it, right? And they'll say like, cool, I don't care as long as I hit a like PR, I'm fine with being in pain. It goes back to the whole West Side. I don't care if I lose 10 years of my life if I put like a kilo on the bar, sort of like notion. And but he said, I would rather pick B. I don't mind taking the short-term loss if I can really work on this, because one, I think he's like he is relatively young. He is also, once you've been in that perpetual cycle of pain, it is quite mentally draining. You know, doing, like I said, powerlifting is an expensive hobby, which means that there's a certain level of enjoyment going into it, right? You go into the gym, you lift because you enjoy it, right? But pain, I think that pain overrides that sensation of enjoyment. And to go in and out every day doing things that you don't like can be quite mentally taxing. So he said B, right? So we kind of like set that as an overarching goal, right? We said that it's unfortunate that you were hurt going into Sheffield, but we are still keeping Malta, which is roughly in like 9 weeks from now, the goal, right? And the goal was to kind of like go in, do our best. We obviously we wanted to try take a shot at the world record bench press, which we didn't get. And the next one was obviously to place as high as we can, right? Once you place top 10, you actually have a chance to win some cash prize and come out unscathed from the battle, right? And basically come out pain-free. So I kind of like, these were the overarching goals that we had, right? So Emil finished 10th, right? So that's goal 1, check. Goal 2 was to obviously come out pain-free relatively, right? Check. We took a shot at the bench world record. We missed, but seeing how what Kaiko did on his third as well, like even if he would definitely, we wouldn't come away with the bench world record even if we got it. So at the end of the day, I think that we met all 3 of our overarching goals going into Sheffield. And granted that this is such a short period of time working together, I think we both, at least through our communication, we concluded that this was a pretty successful prep.
Yeah, that makes sense. So what sorts of strategies did you employ for working around injuries and things like that?
I think that the big thing was obviously looking at how like certain positions, right? So he has like he had pain with his back, his like low back and glute, and then his upper back as well. So when the bar kind of like the low bar position, when it kind of like sits on his back, right? After a while, presses the pressure, right, hurts quite a bit, right? Sometimes to the point where the pain is like so intense that he actually has like some difficulty breathing. So that we had to manage, and because his competition squat is a low bar squat, we have to like kind of like manage that, right? I want to basically say what is a minimum amount of getting you in a low bar position that gives you sufficient practice, right? And giving you enough stimulus, right? So that your strength doesn't drop, right? So obviously the biggest one was his strength, right? That drop was squat, right? Because he squatted more than 300 at Worlds, but he only squatted 287.5 here. Not to mention that when he bombed out Euros, it was because of his squat depth. So we had to kind of like work on both technique in terms of bar placement to manage pain, and obviously allow him to practice consistently enough that he can hit that. Because if he's not practicing enough, right, the feeling of that will feel really foreign to him, and that probably will not end well because you just don't have the proprioceptive awareness of what that feels like, right? So that was kind of like the first strategy we had to use. It's just like I said, load management. And when I look at load management, I just don't look in terms of like whether you're lifting the weight, right? Because at the end of the day, when you're putting a heavy bar on your back, right, that's when you brace, that's pressure, that's tension that your body has to go through. So the first thing was, hey, let's find the minimum amount of work you can do in that position, right? And obviously we try to work the similar muscle groups, right? The quadriceps, the legs, through other means that doesn't have put you in that, force you into the position. So that was the first one, right? And obviously I think that with this low back, we just, for me, I try to keep like exposures to the area, right, as far away as possible. When I say as far away as possible, it also has to be reasonable. So the deadlift, his primary deadlift and his primary squat had like sufficient rest in between, right? So that position where it might cause some pain in the low back isn't too like sensitized throughout, right? So let's just say even if he does deadlift, his low back has like a minor flare up, right? Within 2-3 days, he'll be gone, and then he'll be able to squat, right? And then if it's really close by, it will definitely impact one another. And obviously, like I said, whether that I think that when you give yourself time as well, you allow your body to rest, and you also allow you to do stuff towards it. So obviously we sought out help from Pei, who is her Instagram handle is like powerlifting physio, to look at how he moves, right? Look at certain issues, right? Let's see what are certain drills or that he can do to help like reduce the sensation of pain, right? And I think that also gives the perception it's like I have time now, right, to rest when I'm having pain, but I also have time to work on something, right? And potentially me working on something may lead to a positive outcome. But if you put your sessions, for example, so close to one another, you might be like, okay, cool, I'm doing my deadlifts, I have some pain. My next session, I have one day of rest, but I don't think that I have enough time to work something out, right? Whether that actually happens in reality or not is a different question. Because at the end of the day, for me, when at this high level, right, of lifting, my view is that if it doesn't present a negative outcome, right, and even if it's neutral or maybe slightly positive, even if that's placebo, right, and obviously the main factor is it's a low cost approach, right? I'm not going to spend $10,000 on something that might not even work, right? So it's a low cost approach. Why not give it a shot, right? And I think that psychologically helps as well, that you just basically allow the lifter to kind of like take control of how things are going. You give them a little bit more control, a little bit more. Basically, they're not just like at mercy of their pain all the time, right? So you're allowing them to have autonomy back in their own training and saying that, okay, cool, if this is something I can do, which may potentially work, I may actually create an environment where my training would be slightly more positive. And that is kind of like the approach, giving enough time to rest and obviously giving enough time for that. The thing is this as well, right? It's like not just rest, but if you go to pain, you mentally it affects you, but maybe 2-3 days later, you'll be like, okay, cool. Like it doesn't feel as bad now. Let's gain momentum and let's go into the next session feeling better. So that was my kind of like perspective as well. So I guess at the start, just to kind of like summarize my approach is like we manage load, try to find the minimum amount of stimulus that allows enough practice, right? And then obviously the next part will be keeping the training sessions far apart enough so that in between those training sessions, we can try to create some positive outcome, whether that's an actual physiological or biomechanical response, or even if it's just a psychological one.
Yeah. I've had similar benefits to my own training by doing something very similar, especially for things that are maybe a little bit more chronic or just kind of nagging. Maybe you got a sore knee and it's not enough that you really need direct intervention. It's going to be fine. Just if you can space things out, you're not poking it quite so frequently, and it gives things a bit more time. And then this isn't appropriate for everybody, but for more experienced athletes, I will sometimes present an option. And depending on what we're doing, I might present it a little bit differently. But just to use an example from my own training, it might be like if my back stiffness is beyond some threshold, then I'm not going to deadlift today, or I'm not going to back squat today. I'm going to do this other thing instead. And then the deadlift or the back squat gets bumped to the next session within some limits there, but it kind of gives you more latitude to make some of those decisions as well. Like, hey, today's not the day. So, I mean, yeah, you want to win as many training sessions as you can, but before you do that, you've got to not lose. And kind of avoiding specifically negative situations is a major lead to that. So, yeah, that really resonates quite a bit with me.
Yeah, I think something else that really makes sense, like now we know that pain is just not this biomechanical phenomenon that happens solely because of a structural damage, right? And it's kind of like perception of threat. So another reason why I had of like spacing things out, right? So in my head, I'm not like, I don't tell them that this is a potentially painful session because I don't want to nocebo them into perceiving pain. But in my head, I have to be prepared for the outcome. So I may be an overthinker, but I like to prepare. I like to think of like the possible scenarios that would play out, right? And so that I can be prepared for it. So when it happens, it's not such a shock to me. And the reason why I like space out potentially painful sessions is also due to the fact that when we go through pain, we have a heightened stress response. And heightened stress response does sensitize us to even greater pain. You know, is when you are stressful, you may perceive the same amount of stimulus. Your pain threshold will be lower, right? Given the same amount of stimulus.
Right.
So if you go into the session, you have pain, you're thinking about it, you're stressed, you might not even have the best of sleep because if you're feeling some pain in your lower back, your sleep might not be the best, right? But maybe the next day your stress is lower, you sleep slightly better. And then if you get another day of that, your next session will be, you go into the session with a lower stress, in a lower stress environment, maybe you can come up with a win from that session. So, and that is also one of the reasons why I like to think like, let's create some time for you to lower your stress response, right? And get back into the groove of things again. And I think that obviously through communication as well, letting them know that things will be fine. And once you can establish that, right, they say like, cool, this is the likely pattern that will happen. When they prepare for it, it can't sort of be like, okay, cool, I'm not going in to expect pain, but if I expect pain, I know that it wouldn't impact my next session as much. Whereas you put your sessions really close together, I think it increases the probability of that one bad session would likely lead to another bad session. Whereas I want to be like, cool, if that happens, we want to minimize it carrying over into the next session.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. So during this time, were you guys able to train bench press pretty normally?
Yeah, bench. I mean, so he experienced pain primarily on squats, but after sometimes if the pain is painful enough, right, it would impact his bench. He would feel it during bench, but I would say that it hasn't, like 99% of the training sessions of his bench wasn't like impacted. And usually after benching and after moving a bit, the pain does go away, and only a couple of sessions that the pain linger all the way to the end, right? So in terms of that, I would say that progressively as well, like those sessions that has long lingering pain, right, reduces the frequency of it, reduced progressively. So that's good, right? From my perspective, is because as the training load goes up, your frequency of pain goes down. In my eyes, that's a win because theoretically, if it's a load management thing, it should be quite linear. But I'm seeing like this, like discontinuity where it just like tapers off as that goes up. So that to me is a big win from a perspective of managing pain, but it's also a big win for him because I can push towards the end, right? So bench wasn't really impacted as much. I think his bench is probably impacted more due to a lack of proper benching, because I'm not sure if you watch his videos, but basically he benches on like adjustable bench. So we know how
equipment limitation as much as anything else.
Yeah, so it's funny because whenever I personally hate benching on adjustable bench because first of all there's that gap in between, right, where the space between the seat and the seat for your butt and the support, right, because you have to adjust it, right? So there's always that space and it like annoys me, and I bench like 140. So this person is trying to put 100 kilos more, and obviously the whole stability element and all that kind of stuff kicks in as well. So I think that I'm not saying that it impacted him. I'm just saying that itself is such a small impact, but comparison to the pain, I would say that probably affected to a greater extent. So I'm kind of like downplaying how much the pain would affect his bench, especially
I get you for sure.
towards the tail end.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's still like in a pretty incredible scenario, right? So you just start working with a lifter who happens to be a world-class lifter, ends up with this pretty phenomenal opportunity to take a shot at a bench press world record. And you just don't have a whole lot of background with this lifter at the time. So what's your approach from a coaching standpoint? Like, how did you approach that?
Oh, I think another thing to throw into the mix was as well, because if you look at the way Kaiko benches and Emil benches, they bench very differently, right?
Yeah.
We can say that without a reason, beyond reasonable doubt, that Kaiko will not get pinned for the bench depth rule. But Emil has a relatively high arch. His range of motion is smaller. So at the start, when we started working together, like his lifts were like borderline, and I'm like, I don't want you to bomb. Like, first of all, like in my head, I was like, you had like prior problems with your squat depth, and then now I have to address the bench depth as well. So I'm like, oh my gosh, we have to make it through these two lifts before we can go to the deadlift. So I'm like, okay, cool, let's see what we can do. So we have to like experiment with different things as well. The first couple of weeks was trying to find something, a position with where he can hit depth consistently through his reps. So that was something we had to do. We had to tweak his grip slightly and things like that. So I'm glad, because obviously he doesn't have a problem now anymore. And we know that if he passed Sheffield, it increases the likelihood of him passing at Malta as well, right? So I do think that
it's a very good sign at a minimum.
Yeah, so that was something we had to figure out as well. But personally, like I asked him, right? I think the most important thing for me was I asked him. I mean, he is a really good bencher even before we started working together. So his best bench was 227.5, right? Prior to starting working together, he benched 235.5 during training, right? So and at Sheffield, he benched we got 230 on a second, right? So we went for like 240, all right, just to have a feel what the world record is. And then we missed, right? So probably has a couple of kilos left in the tank. And so at the end of the day, we still came out with a small bench PR, probably slightly better if we didn't attempt the world record. So I think that my question for him was first, what worked, right? What worked in the past? Because you're already benching so well, right? So there must be something that is working. And I took that and I'm like, okay, cool. I don't want to change things up too much, because you're already a phenomenal lifter to begin with. And with that said, right, how are we gonna just fine tune things to make you just slightly better? Because if you think about it, he lost he got second at Worlds by just such a small margin that if it was just slightly better, he would have won, right? So the question is, do I really need to overhaul everything? But I looked at, I decided for it's kind of like this like evolutionary perspective. It's just that we are at a certain point of where we are now because of everything that we have gone through. People will say, oh, cool, maybe your appendix doesn't really matter. Like you have this part of your body that doesn't really matter. But training, it might be like that. There might be something in it that doesn't really matter and you can throw out, right? But if you came all the way here, it means that there's something that has worked. So I want to try and find out what works and try to maintain that and make the change small enough to result in small enough improvements. Because once you're at a high level, like I said, he only lost by such a small margin. Maybe that small enough is just enough to bring you from second place to world champion. So that was kind of like the approach I took.
Yeah, I think that's a very sensible approach. I have done similar things with high-level lifters that I coach. I think it speaks a lot to coaching skill to have the range to be able to do that. I think it's important for a coach to I'm trying to think of a good example. It's like if you were a computer programmer, but you could only program in like one specific language. Like you're just not that useful at that point. It's such a narrow set of problems that you can address. You'd be much better off if you were at least somewhat competent in a wider range of things. And I think it's important for a coach to be able to write training that skews more high intensity or skews more low intensity, or take any training variable pretty much and tweak it any kind of way. And there's somebody who's doing that right now and it's producing awesome results. And I think to be an effective coach and to leverage those experiences, you've got to be competent. That maybe isn't like your go-to style, but able to write training in that way. So I'm not sure really how Emil was training like prior to working with you on that, but I think that's like a really important ability to have. And I mean, for some people, no doubt they're thinking like, yeah, that'd be a no-brainer. Hey, you say you squat on Monday for 5 sets of 2 and I can write that. Well, yeah, but maybe a little bit more than that. It's like understanding what makes a program like that tick and being able to write something that's different from that, but still gets at the same stuff underneath. I think that's the A plus skill that we're talking about. Like just copying something and tweaking some variables here and there is, I mean, it's better than just shoehorning every athlete into whatever system you've created. But I think if you can take that as far as you can take it, it's really kind of understanding what makes different strategies function and being able to emulate that in a variety of ways.
Yeah, for sure. I think going back to your analogy about the computer as well is that if we look at the lifter as someone where we want to create like the most efficient or the strongest like processing power, right? Sometimes I think that if we only know one language, right? We think first of all the question is it even a language problem, right? Then the second is question, because if we are only coders, we will always be looking at the language must be the problem. I need to change the language. I need to change from CSS to Python or to Ruby or whatever. But what if it's not even a language problem? Maybe you just need a bigger RAM, right? Maybe you just need different software. Maybe it's a hardware problem, right? And that kind of like goes back to the generalist point of view, is that you probably have to detect what the problem is, right? So I don't think that like for Emil, he wasn't like, if we use like programming as a thing where it's a language, I don't think it was a language problem. I don't think it's a coding issue. It was just other stuff, right? Like if we look at like injury as the limiting factor, you can say, okay, maybe it's a RAM, right? He's just like, once you pass a certain threshold, the thing just like stops because your processor is too slow and the computer just crashes. So I do think that as a coach, we kind of have to, first of all, have a general perspective so that we are not like, say, shoehorned into thinking that this problem is the only reason it can result. This is the only reason why this problem manifests itself in this manner. And it also goes back into our conversation prior about humans being biological system, which means the problem can come from different kind of stuff, right? There are certain issues that we can say with higher degree of confidence that it is likely that this is the issue. But if it's not, I don't think it's worth kind of like going down that rabbit hole when clearly that isn't the I talk about this. It is quite interesting because I had this conversation with one of Paul Marsh, which is one of the British coach, and he was helping during the Sheffield, helping Pete and SPD run stuff. So we're talking about just like monetary reward in terms of in powerlifting. So for example, we were just having this conversation and we said that, cool, if a lifter tells the coach, right, if I win Sheffield or if I win a competition, like maybe 5% of my winnings will go to you, right? That is your cut on top of what I usually pay you, right? So while some people might say, oh, the coaches shouldn't be doing things out of monetary motivation and stuff, but I mean, first of all, let's face it, like powerlifting coaching isn't the most lucrative career to begin with. So I think that any form of monetary reward, could potentially be a good thing. First for the lifters, obviously, then obviously the coaches. But then it also made me wonder, right? Because will it actually break some of the dogmatic holdings that coaches have? Because now the monetary reward, because if you don't have a monetary reward, you always want to be like, this worked because of me and my system, right? And I'm trying to like sell my system or like hype it up, or like I have this like secret sauce that would create like the ultimate lifter. But if you now have a monetary reward, would the monetary reward outweigh your own, like, I wouldn't say ego, but your own affinity towards holding on to your system when the system doesn't work? Because if it doesn't work and like, man, this is not working, right? Will I lose out on like, if like 5% of my cut if my lifter doesn't win? Would then cause prompt coaches to be like, I'm going to change my mind because I need to? So like that question is like kind of like interesting to me, because
my 2 cents on it is that there's already a monetary reward, at least for coaches who have athletes at high levels, and I think you can broaden the scope of high level to like include probably national championships and things like that as well. So quite a few coaches would fall into that category. There's already a monetary reward because athletes like that, athletes that are competing at that level, that just having them be successful at that level is very strong marketing. So if you can change something about your system, if something about your system doesn't work and you know that and you could change it and have them be more successful at whatever level, then that will result in a monetary reward by itself. Now, that in my observation seems to be kind of personality driven, that there's some people who see the problem that way and then other people just don't seem to see the problem that way, or maybe they think they do, but they don't appear to the outside to see the problem that way. Yeah, I don't know. You see dogmatic beliefs and kind of closely held beliefs like that in other sports as well, where you think, gosh, there's a lot of money on the line if you guys would just do it better. I'm thinking like weight cutting strategies for fighters being a classic example, although maybe that's improving over time, but there's a lot of dogmatic belief and plenty of money on the line.
Yeah, I think that the big thing is like, I don't know, because powerlifting is a sport, right? Where like say we're not coaches where we earn like lucrative salaries year round. I mean, some coaches do, but so I think that the entry to hold on to your pre-existing belief is quite like low, because a lot of like, for example, I don't know anything about fighting, the arena fighting. So all the UFC fans out there, they might call me out, but like, let's just say the coaches already probably get paid quite a bit amount, right? So at the end of the day, like, I don't have reason to change because I'm really going with the assumption that my beliefs right now results in my salary, right? So it's kind of like, yeah, cool. It's already a quite high reward. But when it comes to powerlifting coaching, is that my beliefs, literally my reward is like so low that any reward that is higher than that should supersede my belief if a change in my belief will lead to a higher reward, right? So that's kind of like how I'm looking at. And the thing with coaching as well is that I do think that there will be a trend that if you don't change things up, right, people outside will notice, especially now that you're putting lifters on like Destel all the time. Oh, this lifter would do well. This lifter would rank like that in Sheffield. And if that lifter kind of like falls down, first of all, it may be other factors, not just the training. Like people age, people grow old, people have different, and then they just can't sustain the same training or a high level of training as they would before. But to the outside world, it's like, oh, it must be the training that's the problem, right? And the question is that if you don't change things up, people will notice that, hey, even if you do change things up, right, people will be like, is something going on that this like quote unquote ex coach is deteriorating in their coaching, right? And then obviously that would probably drive potential lifters to different coaches, right? So it kind of is the reason why I think that for powerlifting you don't need a system is because I don't think that it's not like selling an operating system for computer or like, okay, cool, we know like Windows 95 was the superior one compared to Windows 2000. It's not like this operating system where it's like set in stone where nothing changes, because at the end of the day, you can just tell a lifter, this is how I do things. And if you tell a different lifter, this is how I do things, but you present an approach that's completely different, and if both of them make progress, the outside world will be like, the system this coach is using works, but there is no system. I'm literally doing something that's individual for lifter A and lifter B, but I tell them that this is how things would work, right? To the outside world, they can't perceive it that way. There's no way to tangibly quantify the methodology or the training approach that coaches would use across every single athlete, like how you would be able to say, if I go to Walmart and I buy Mac OS, whatever the latest one is, right, it's probably going to be the same thing, right? So
Right.
I think training isn't like that.
Yeah. There is kind of a tendency to want to reduce a coaching approach to one thing, like this coach is the high volume guy, that coach is the accessory work guy, and that seems to be rarely the case in conversation. I mean, I understand kind of where that kind of desire comes from. But I was talking to Claire Zai about a week ago. Now and then I drive up to Seattle and train at a gym, and she's often there, so we talk about training. We were talking about coaching and kind of what people ought to look for in a coach. And she emphasized, probably more than I usually do, good communication, like a good coach athlete relationship. I mean, that's one of the pillars that I think of when I think of like what is good coaching. We talk about leadership, relationship, creativity, and like having good relationship with a coach is, I mean, it's important to extracting any sort of value at all from that relationship, because it's not a computer program. It's not like, oh, I hired the coach, they sent me the program, I do the program, get the gains. It's a lot more complicated than that. It goes back to humans being complicated, and each lifter presenting different sets of problems that need to be addressed in their own ways, and coming up with creative solutions to whatever those specific problems are. So yeah, it's definitely built on top of a foundation of relationship. And I mean, I'm the kind of coach that really likes to emphasize the solution and the nuts and bolts of the intervention itself. But you never get there unless you kind of build it on that foundation first. So, I mean, I guess that's a long way around of agreeing with you. I think that's something that's definitely underappreciated.
Yeah, I think that if I could like really look at, I think a quality that would define, or I mean, a good coach should encompass is some form of like epistemic humility. Like we
Yeah.
realize that our knowledge, right, our set of knowledge is like not infallible, right, and it's incomplete, provisional, and whenever there's in lack of new evidence, we might have to revise it, right? It goes back to like Socrates in the Plato writes in his Apology saying that Socrates says the wisest guy because he says he knows. I mean, obviously you can, in a way, it's a paradox because to know that you know nothing, you need to know something. But basically, he's saying that he is the wisest because he knows his ignorance, right? That he knows that he would not know every single thing. And I think that when it comes to coaching as well, because we always look at, we place an emphasis on like constant communication is a really good thing. But there will be lifters out there that don't like constant communication. They'll be like, just tell me what to do. Just let me be. If I'm making progress, just let me be, right? So in that sense, you can't say that constant communication is good, right? And the things that in light of new evidence, you kind of have to revise your position. And I think that the crazy thing about coaching is that like with like sports science all coming out, we want to look at coaching as this like really empirical thing where we put X in, we come up with Y, right? But like I said, with the whole like biological system, it's not as straightforward. I mean, it's nice that if, like I said, if we could, but then like most of us would probably end up without jobs anyway. So I think that knowing when to change your mind, right? And change your mind not for the sake of changing your mind, just to seem that you are always pursuing this novel thing or so you can look cool, right? I think that epistemic humility is something that coaches should have. And I think that there's always kind of like, I think the ability to kind of like have discussion, even though that there's disagreement, is also like really important, because I think that if parties kind of like disagree one another, right, it means that there is a gap in knowledge, right? Whether between you and me, because if we have that same knowledge, I mean, obviously people will say, oh, you can look at the same data and interpret it differently, but then that is also can be considered as your prior knowledge interpreting the data. But let's just say there's the differences in that set of knowledge. My role as a coach is to figure out what is that difference that or lack of knowledge, either from me or from you, that's causing this disagreement. And let's see if we can kind of like learn something from what's in between, right? If we try to reach the middle ground. So, but I think to do that, you really have to say that, hey, my set of knowledge is kind of like incomplete, provisional. Like I said, everything works once until it doesn't. And when it doesn't, maybe it's time to revise it. So I think that is something that I think the reason why like I kind of like looked up to the things you do is because you're looking at RTS. Like I said, my first inception into like high level powerlifting coaching content was the RTS training manual. Like I said, what was all of that kind of stuff, right? Like RPE, what is this? Like, but from then now to Mike T now, like you have like revised your views. And at the end of the day, even like I said, reading your articles on like Juggernaut training system when like the JTS site was quite big with like Dan Green and all that. You like wrote again, like, oh, like the whole West Side thing, speed work and all that. But we had conversations offline as well. You said like perhaps like those can be incorporated to create results. But even though the mechanisms are not as proposed, right, the results, the outcome measure that we want is still similar, right? So like speaking to you, I've seen that you have revised your views, and that is something that I think that a good coach should have, is that the ability to revise their views whenever they need to, keeping in mind the goal of the lifter.
Yeah, definitely. And thanks for saying so. I mean, that's kind of one lesson that I've learned quite well is that every time I come out strongly on one side or the other of pretty much anything, I'll be hit with like strong evidence to show me all the ways in which that position doesn't fit. The speed work is a great example. We wrote these articles. The title ended up being Why Speed Work Doesn't Work, which isn't quite the core message, but it was talking about I would say the core message is like why low intensity dynamic effort work does not necessarily result in increases in force output, which I think is a thing that I would stand by now. But to go from that to this thing doesn't work, therefore you shouldn't use it, is not a good logical leap. Like it's there are many other training effects to care about other than just the increase in force production. And so in my experience, I wrote this article, and after its publication, I start to see in like my own coaching practice, like all the different scenarios come up where you go, the right tool for this job really is something that looks a lot like speed work. And so you swallow your pride and put it in there because that's what's good for the athlete. But it's not just speed work. Like I've had that happen with so many things. And it's kind of led me to take on an attitude of not wanting to discard much of any tool, which I don't know if that's, there's probably limitations to that viewpoint too. But lately, the powerlifting community seems to have gone in the direction of being fairly against front squats, which ironically I've spent quite a few years really dedicating some time to front squats. And I think that there's quite a bit of value there. It's not a thing that I'm putting in even the majority of the powerlifter programs that I write, but it's one of those things where I'm like, well, this is a tool and it has its utility. Let's not write it off as being useless or even mostly useless just yet. There's space for, especially for a coach, to keep that stuff in the toolbox, to hit again on a worn out metaphor, but keep that stuff in the toolbox because it will come up that it's useful at some point, and better to have the tool and understand how to use it than not.
Yeah, I 100%. I think that because I think when people look at like exercise selection, I don't think that they view it from the perspective of, is this useful, right? Because if it's useful, it means that it's useful for a certain purpose. But they look at it from perspective, is it better, right? Which means that if it's better, they try to draw a comparison, right? Is a front squat better than a back squat, better than a low bar squat? But then again, if you're drawing a comparison, you also have to draw a comparison that is it better for lifter X versus lifter Y, and
Right.
and then you kind of draw the comparison at a different level, and then now you know that every lifter is so different. What may be better for lifter X may be worse for lifter Y, and that could be front squat, that could be back squat, that could be the amount of times you're front squatting. So I don't think that people, when they look at exercise selection, they don't look at it from its usefulness or not, because when they look at usefulness, we look at function, right? The function of a tool, right? But then they put in the comparison, is it better than another tool? But then, like I said, if this person can't use the tool well, or this tool just doesn't suit this person, it will not be better, right? So I think evaluating it from the perspective of like function versus comparison kind of like helps me kind of understand why people would like to make really like broad stroke statements of like, oh, this exercise is useless. And the thing is that I don't think it's useless. It's just that you feel like in this situation, it doesn't produce the outcome that you want for your lifter. And at the end of the day,
any given program that you write, 99% of the available exercises are not being used. So you have to make those trade-offs for sure. It's just that you can't, I wouldn't recommend writing off any of those tools wholesale.
Yeah, for sure. I think that it is like, I think that it's funny because I think something that really like set things into perspective for me and like sort of like keeps me humble in the way is just that we look at powerlifting as our world, right? Like we are powerlifters, but dude, like powerlifting is barely like a smidge in this entire like universe. First of all, like, I mean, if you just extrapolate it to a sense that philosophers still debate about
right?
Zoom out. First of all, some people can't even like, people are still like disagreeing on whether there's an external world, the question of God. And then even in physics, right? Like people do say, oh, cool, like with all these like quantum paradoxes, you have to give up your widely cherished beliefs of how the world is. Like there are conversations like that happening that would literally alter reality as it is. But then we have these such strong beliefs that, okay, cool, like front squats are really bad because we can't do it at all because it will literally change the landscape of the world. I'm like powerlifting in the grand scheme of things is nothing but a drop of water in the ocean. Like, I'm not saying don't take it seriously, but try to go in with a little bit more humility. And if you do give up your belief whether front squats are good or not, it's not going to change. It's not going to change much, right? It's not going to change the world. It's not going to ruin your lifter's progress. And knowing how robust humans can be and how we can adapt and how biological systems change over time, it probably doesn't really matter as much as you think it is to really hold on to this and say, in every circumstance possible, front squats will not work. So I think, like I
epistemic humility, I think that's a excellent kind of theme even.
Yeah. And I just think like I noticed this trend as well, and is that people who I'm like I said, this is not a knock on people who take powerlifting seriously, but those like there will be people that powerlifting is literally the only thing that they know, and therefore they think that really I need to disagree with this person so much because if this person is right, it will literally cause a rupture in my fabric of reality because you have just made your reality powerlifting and powerlifting only. And I have conversations with my coach, who is also my good friend, Jason Clark, who coaches EV Corrigan, right? And we just said that sometimes like those lifters that do really well are those lifters that tend to have a life outside of powerlifting. And then they go into the gym focus, right? Don't get me wrong. But they also do things outside. Then they realize that, hey, powerlifting is not all there is. While it's important, while I can potentially make a career out of it, and trust me, like EV Corrigan would know because she won Sheffield, right?
Sure.
But there are other things outside that I should be focusing on as well. And then when I go into the gym, maybe I just zone out, I do my training, or whether I just enjoy my training for as how it should be. And then that's how I make progress. But if you really think like powerlifting is your reality, one small change, right? If you think about it, like if your world is literally powerlifting, the carpet change in your gym, right, is going to ruin your world because that is the only world that you know. But if you look at it from a wider perspective, man, your carpet change in your gym that you squat on 4:30 p.m. on Friday, it's not going to impact the grand scheme of things. But if you make that session your entire world, then the magnitude of it is so much bigger, and it just eats into your own head. And then therefore you have that that strongly held belief that that carpet was the reason why I couldn't squat.
Right. Well, speaking of having important things outside of powerlifting, I have to go pick up my kids. So it's the end of the day here, so I've got to wrap up and go pick everybody up from schools and daycares and all that. But man, always so good to talk to you. Good to hear about your experiences from Sheffield, and good to kind of compare notes. I think it's nice to go like run the range, right? Like from stuff that's very tactical, first this intervention, then that intervention kind of thing, all the way up to kind of the very strategic, very philosophical underpinnings of why you might make decisions the way that you do. Always enjoy talking with you, Kedric.
Yeah, 100%. Say likewise. Like I say, I think this like philosophical conversations are important, and I think that a lot of even Matt Gary, when he started his book, right, which you wrote the foreword to, he started with like, what's the philosophy of coaching, right? Because that really underpins everything. So yeah, I'm really happy to kind of like talk to you about that, because those are like areas we can explore in the future, and we won't be able to finish talking about it. But I really appreciate the invite to have me on again. And I
Yeah.
love that all 3 episodes now we said that we talked about 3 different things, and that
Sure.
has always been really, really just a pleasure on my end.
Same here, man. I'm looking forward to the 4th appearance. So thanks again
Yep.
for coming. Thanks everybody for watching and listening, and we'll see you guys next time.